everybody. Morning. Morning. Okay, let us begin, please, with our COVID coverage and Matt.
Good morning, Jeff. So renewed warnings about what's coming in the fall as fresh forecasts suggest an accelerating death toll soon. The top lines here, as we approach 200,000 Americans lost, Fauci tells Harvard med students, I just think we need to hunker down and get through the fall and winter because it's not going to be easy, pointing to more indoor activities and likely upticks. Yesterday was another big day for death reports, 900 plus, and right now we stand at about 192,000 deaths and 6.4 million cases. The CDC's latest group of forecasts predicting that in just the next 3 weeks we'll see another 25,000 more deaths reported, up to 217,000 by October 3rd. And also for the first time, the CDC is spelling out the COVID death rate by age, showing that it's under 1% for all but the over 70 group. Trump defending his overall response at yet another crowded, mostly maskless rally, and the NIH director on our town hall coming down hard on this, saying he is puzzled and disheartened by the lack of mask wearing at these and other events. We still look for kind of the upshot of Labor Day, and just noting that today marks 6 months since the WHO declared COVID a global pandemic, and almost 8 months since the first case in the U.S. The vaccine story obviously accelerating. Today, Sanjay conducts a one-on-one interview with the head of Operation Warp Speed at noon. We'll see what news we make here. This is a taped interview with Sanjay fronting bits of it afterward. AstraZeneca has not yet determined when it can resume its trial after that safety issue, but its CEO still predicts approval by the end of the year. Lots of new words of safety assurance from the likes of Collins, who told our town hall that even though the process is highly sped up, the trials are more rigorous than those of the past. And the FDA's Hahn pointing to an important date, October 22nd, the day agency leaders will meet to discuss vaccine applications, but he's not predicting a timetable for when there will actually be an authorization. Lancet pointing to the fact that vaccine confidence around the world is at a worrying level, blaming the spread of misinformation, and just an interesting note from Birx that it's becoming even harder to predict when the clinical trials will be done, because as cases are currently declining, it's harder to conduct the trials because they need lots of infections in the areas of the trials to test the efficacy. In terms of the key data points and the areas we're watching, Fauci yesterday calling out the now and next surge areas that he sees, saying we've seen it in the southern states, in the Midwest, and now, if you look on a map, he says, Montana, North and South Dakota, Michigan, Minnesota, and Iowa. And on the CNN data map, the highest week-to-week increases at the moment are Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. The CNN White House team has gotten their hands on a number of these White House Task Force weekly state reports, and all of them are focusing on areas with college towns and the concern about bars staying open, and recommending that states look at sewage water for the early signs COVID is circulating. And just to sort of update and repeat what I said yesterday, that for context, at the moment anyway, the declines that we've been talking about do still hold. New cases per day on average down 15% over the last 14 days, and new deaths per day reported on average down 24%. But again, lots of worries about where this is going next. We've got Nick Valencia in Atlanta on the latest and regional headlines, Alexandra Field in New York on the general story. I know others will get into more of the 9/11 events and our leaders, but Athena Jones can also talk about the impact of the pandemic on these remembrances, and just highlighting this tweet just now from Dr. Jonathan Reiner. They're reading the names of those killed on 9/11. It would take 3 days to read the names of those Americans who died during this pandemic. And the CDC study yesterday pointing to the fact that adults testing positive were about twice as likely to have reported going to a restaurant in the last 14 days, that 42% reported close contact with a sick person, half of them a family member, and it found no significant differences between those who tested positive versus negative when it came to other kinds of activities. Things like offices, gyms, salons, public transportation, that kind of thing, according to the CDC study. We'll hear from Fauci again today at 11 o'clock at an event, and just keeping an eye on antibody treatment. Still no big announcements yet. The NIH's Collins saying he's excited by what he's seeing, though. Regeneron promising data by the end of this month. And we've got Sanjay, Elizabeth, and Jacqueline available from the health team. The wrap pieces today are Nick Watt for 4, 6, and 8, Erica Hill for 5, 7, and 9. And I will pause it there.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew. Let's go to international, please.
The story there is really Europe looking like some parts of it may go back under lockdown. France has broken its record for the number of daily COVID cases, nearly 10,000 daily cases yesterday, which is the largest daily increase since the pandemic began, and they are considering reimposing lockdown. Jim Bisman is on that. And similar situation in Israel, which is looking at a second lockdown beginning at the end of next week. Oren is on that. They've had 4,000 daily cases roughly throughout this week. So yeah, that's the kind of theme that we're seeing as Europe opened up too quickly. Kids go back to school. Are they going to have to go back to square one all over again? And then finally, we're keeping an eye on India, which has set its global world record for the second time in 2 days with 96,000 cases. Veritas is reporting on that, looking at a kind of low mortality rate but a high number of deaths. So we're focusing on those. That's just COVID. I'll do the other stuff later.
Okay, thank you very much. Business.
Jeff, good morning. Dow futures pointing to a strong open, looking to close out what has been a really volatile holiday-shortened week. This morning, President Trump congratulated J.P. Morgan Chase for ordering everybody back to the office. Obviously, this was a misleading tweet, as JPM only called back its senior managers into the office to work starting on September 21st, with some exceptions allowed. Meanwhile, still in New York, top business leaders are warning Mayor de Blasio about New York's recovery. Up to 150 business leaders, including the CEOs of Goldman City, JetBlue, and the NBA commissioner, have sent a letter to de Blasio saying that he needs to take more decisive action to address crime and other quality of life issues, saying that it's jeopardizing the city's economic recovery and the return to work process. Alfred Kosich is up and available on that. And meanwhile, in New York, businesses, small and large, continuing to shutter. The iconic New York department store chain, Century 21, filed for bankruptcy, saying it will shut down its businesses, close 13 stores, and lay off 1,400 employees. Unsurprisingly, this comes on the heels of the Senate failing to advance any further stimulus talks. So we have Allison up and available on all those threads today, and that's where we begin on COVID.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Washington, Antoine.
Hey there, the president is remembering September 11th from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, but the week ends with the president trying to contain the fallout on his handling of the pandemic. The president continues to insist he wasn't lying when he told Woodward the virus was deadly and airborne. On the PAC's rally last night, check out Acosta's interviews with supporters, one telling Jim he didn't care if he died, and the president ridiculously comparing himself to Churchill and FDR, trying to explain he is trying to keep the calm, but juxtapose that with his amped-up scare tactics, warning Antifa will overrun the suburbs. And there's no evidence he's taking the virus any more seriously now. He admitted yesterday he's been watching Fox News for 8 hours. As noted, the week ends with Congress making no deal and no talks on a stimulus deal. That means no financial relief for millions of Americans before the presidential election. That's COVID.
Okay, let's open it up for any thoughts on COVID from anybody, please.
Hey, Jeff, good morning. It's Ben. Matthew already got at a lot of the great editorial from Collins on another fantastic town hall last night, and I just wanted to encourage shows and digital and everyone to go back and look at some of the verbatim that we alerted out last night. Collins is, always measured in what he says and doesn't usually say things that make huge headlines, but just two examples from last night. One, talking about the issue with masks and how they become so political. He said if you would come as an alien from another planet, you would scratch your head and think that this planet doesn't have much promise for the future. And then one other comment of his getting at a question about herd immunity. He said letting it rip and running its course does not seem to be the kind of option that a thinking person would want to embrace. Is that, a thinly veiled shot at Trump? I don't think we can say for sure, but definitely a very interesting and thoughtful comment by Collins last night.
Okay, thank you. Yes, indeed. Other thoughts? Anyone on COVID? Okay, Matthew.
Okay, the Western wildfires remain a huge story for us. A rising death toll, evacuations on a massive scale. The overall death toll in the region rises to 15 as 7 bodies are found in California. Fears of many more lost in the fires. In Oregon, more than 500,000 people, which is more than 10% of the state population, forced to evacuate. Nearly 1 million acres have burned. Several small towns in Oregon, places like Phoenix and Talent, almost entirely wiped out. Across the country, 102 active large wildfires burning. The wind's expected to die down today a little bit. We've got Camila Bernal and Lucy Kavanaugh in Oregon, Dan Simon around the Creek Fire in Central California, Sarah Steidner in Southern California around the Bobcat Fire. And I continue to highlight the offerings from the climate team just published from Brandon Miller and Drew Kahn. The Western scenes are what a world looks like with just a degree or two of global warming, and a lot worse is in store in the coming years. The other big story for us, the George Floyd case, the 4 officers accused facing a judge in less than an hour. They appear poised to blame each other. It's a motions hearing in Minneapolis at 10 o'clock on things like whether to hold a joint trial or whether to move the trial. But we get some indications of where this is going from some recent filings from the officers and their attorneys, each suggesting someone else was in charge of the situation. The rookie officers saying they were taking their cues from the veteran Chauvin saying he was simply assisting the others. We also expect defense attorneys to introduce details alleging George Floyd was engaged in large quantity drug sale and possession as they ask the state to release details pertaining to gang membership, and we expect to hear from George Floyd's family and his attorney, Ben Crump, a little bit after the press conference, and we've got Josh Campbell on that in Minneapolis. I think that's it.
Okay. International.
So we're still continuing our coverage of this migrant camp that I've mentioned over the last couple of days. Melissa Bell has a good piece looking at it. And Greece is really taking a very hard line, saying it won't be blackmailed into allowing these refugees off the island. They say the fire was started on purpose, and it's very tense on the camp now, so who knows what's going to happen to those refugees. They found a new site on the island. It's an old shooting range. Doesn't look like it's any bigger than the place they have now. But obviously this plays into how Greece is trying to manage the COVID situation and balance that with dealing with this humanitarian issue. So it's a good story for us. We're staying on top of that. Microsoft releasing evidence that cyber espionage groups have targeted the election. We've got some international reaction on that. They pointed to Russia, China, and Iran. We've got reaction from all 3. Peskov, unsurprisingly, has denied anything. Iran says they don't care who the president of the United States is anyway. And China says we're not interfering with internal affairs of the U.S. But by the way, the U.S. is the biggest cyber hacker in the world. So Nick Robertson is pulling all of that together with the international reaction. And then finally, a really good story that we've talked about a lot in our editorial meeting is the CEO of Rio Tinto, massive mining group, has resigned. And this comes off the back of the destruction of a 46,000-year-old sacred indigenous site in Australia when they were trying to get iron ore. And it's just obviously created a huge issue and discussion point in Australia. The destruction went ahead despite a 7-year battle, and we're just really looking at how the company has dealt with this situation and fallout from that. So that's another story we're getting to too.
Great, thank you very much. Business, anything else from you?
Yeah, just one other
item. We have a great story coming from Donny later this hour. It's making its way through Triad now. Emergency services in Oregon have been overrun with calls about false claims about wildfires and Antifa. 9/11 dispatchers there have been getting these calls about a false rumor that Antifa members have been arrested for setting those fires, a claim that was promoted by the anonymous account behind the QAnon conspiracy theories. Authorities there pleading with the public to only trust and share information that is verified by public officials. Obviously, this comes a day after a Costa report that Vice President Pence expected to attend a fundraiser hosted by a couple who appeared to have expressed support for QAnon conspiracy theories. And Donny will be up and available on that once the story is released.
Right. Okay. Thank you. The rest of Washington from Antoine.
Oh, hey there. So in addition to the 9/11 events that we were watching this morning, we're tracking the state sending out mail-in ballots and the problems and delays. You're reporting today on how U.S. courts are grappling with voters should they get a second chance if election officials make a mistake that invalidates their ballots. In Wisconsin, a major problem there, the state court holding up mailing the millions of mail-in ballots until a decision can be made on whether to include the Green Party on the ballot. In Arizona, the Secretary of State, they're pushing back on Barr's scare tactic. He said yesterday there's no more secret vote when you vote by mail. Watch out for Pam Brown's exclusive reporting on the Trump campaign's obsession, digging for details in swing states on vote counting and gearing up for potential legal fights. We'll keep an ear on Pompeo and track his travel. He's headed for the Taliban talks. This is Kylie Atwood and Jenny Hansler report concerns among current and former national security officials that withdrawing troops from Afghanistan prematurely will jeopardize the making of a peace deal there. And that's it from me.
Okay. Let's go to politics first, and then we'll open it up. Politics.
Good morning, Jeff. Just taking a look back, it's Friday, and I just think the larger context of these last 8 days or so, it's about as bad as a Labor Day week as somebody could sort of devise in a laboratory for Donald Trump, who just has been on defense nonstop from the initial report of the Atlantic and the disparaging of the military, obviously to the Woodward revelations, to clearly an administration that has not been able to stop Russia's attack on our democracy and, in fact, eager to downplay any such interference. It just has been a complete defensive week at precisely the time when voters start tuning in, and as we know, when early voting processes are beginning to get underway in some critical states. Having said all that, whether or not that is swaying voters in their behavior is not something we know. So I think we should be able to note that it is there's no campaign manager on earth that would devise this week the way it played out these last 8 days and the way the president sort of executed on it. And have that be the game plan heading into the fall campaign stretch. But that shouldn't lead us to then think that somehow voters are being completely swayed by it. In fact, Jeff Zeleny, who will have a piece from North Carolina today, has been there throughout the week as a lot of these controversies have occurred. He finds certainly a ton of fired up Democrats over it, but he also is finding a bunch of indifference from Republicans around it as well. He will have a piece looking at that, and of course the intense effort in North Carolina, because it's a critical prize, critical to Donald Trump's path to 270. It's why he's been there 3 times in as many weeks, and why we've seen Ivanka and Eric Trump and Don Jr. there all this week as the ballots of early absentee ballots have been sent out to voters there. The president's week of defense is coming also with this Republican hand-wringing over the advertising disparity due to the cash crunch that we talked about on this call a few days ago. Some nervous Republicans, while stepping in, the campaign manager continues to sort of point to a surgical approach here. Where ballots are going out is where they're sort of surging advertising resources. But if you look at the last 7 weeks and you look at sort of Biden plus outside allied groups, Trump plus his outside allied groups, it's about a 2-to-1 advertising advantage right now for Biden over those last many weeks. The 9/11 remembrances we were mentioned. I just want to note that Jessica Dean will be there in Shanksville around Biden's visit, and Ryan Noble's there around Trump's visit. And I think that's where we start. That's the only piece I believe is slated for the lead and EBOF. And I think that's it from us.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, David. So let's open it up now for anybody. Any thoughts?
Hey there, it's Rebecca. I know it's hard to get excited about something that didn't happen, but I think the failure of Washington to produce another stimulus is really significant and just is like going to be devastating for people personally and for the businesses that they would have spent the money in. So I really just think it's something that really deserves our attention, given how great the need is that we've done such a great job reporting on.
I think it's a really good note. So hard to cover that. But I think it's a really good note. We should try to get it done. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, as I was reading through the comments, Jim Acosta talking to people in the crowd at the rally last night, and obviously seeing all those pictures of no social distancing and very few people with masks on, et cetera. And the contrast to the football game last night where lots of masks, people socially distanced, the whole plan in place to protect the fans, the players, the referees, the coaches, everybody. You know, Andy Reid wearing a face shield on the field. And the NFL, you know, it's an example of like if the NFL was running the government, then things would probably be in much better shape than they are. And I just thought the contrast of those two things was just interesting. It's, you know, I go back to the sports leagues again. The NBA in its bubble is doing a great job. The NHL has done an incredible job in terms of handling the virus and working through it and having a plan. Baseball obviously struggled early, but they seem to have bounced back and are in a better place. It just was pretty extraordinary. The two events last night, our iconic National Football League, the President of the United States speaking in Michigan. I just think there's an interesting conversation to have just about those in contrast to each other.
For sure, and we've got great video of both things, and the Acosta tape is great, so I think we should absolutely be doing that.
It's also quite extraordinary, as you said, the Acosta tape is great. I mean, he did an amazing job, but hearing what those people are saying about it, only 10,000 people have died, and again, we've talked about this and shown it a bunch of times, but I don't think we should let that go either about how, first of all, it's an example of how the president having a successful message delivered to his people, that it's not a big deal, stay calm, his idea about staying calm. And then the only other thing I know we've written a bunch of pieces, it's been discussed on the air, but, you know, him citing FDR and Churchill and just how wrong and off that is in terms of the way he's using it and the way it was actually, the actual truth in history. You know, I go back to that thing I said a few weeks ago about what the suffragette historian said in Aaron's documentary about history is not actually what happened, it's who tells the story. And Trump tells his own story, and as evidenced by the people that Jim Acosta talked to last night, his telling of his story is working with a large segment of the population. So I think those things are all things to talk about as we go forward.
And the propaganda that they consume and that Trump consumes, as Antoine said, watching 8 hours of Fox yesterday, it's all in concert. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, it's Meredith. I just want to tee off of something that Cutler and Michael touched on, that the failure of Washington to pass a stimulus package and the numbness that many Americans and maybe many of our viewers and users are feeling on many fronts. The economic suffering that people are going through, and also the suffering and pain and loss from COVID, which serves as a contrast on a day like today as everyone is
thinking back to 9/11, and there's collective grief and collective mourning, and we have the visuals of the moments of silence and all the ceremonies this morning, and we'll have the visuals tonight of the Towers of Light. It really just serves as such a contrast of where the nation was then and where the nation is now. And when you look forward and think about what's to come, and you have the big headline of Fauci saying we all just need to hunker down because there's more to come, and we're still in stage one. It's just a completely different kind of collective emotional state, and possibly numbness because there's no way to share grief. It's a thread that we've mentioned before on this call, but I think it's extra poignant and may come to people today on 9/11 in a way that it normally doesn't.
Yep. Look, I think, yes, I agree. And I think another observation that we should be making is how together the country was, how united the country was 19 years ago, this afternoon and tonight, after what happened. And here we are 19 years later, so divided. And frankly, again, not in any way should we ever intimate or suggest and minimize the number who lost their lives on 9/11. But we were so united around that. And here the numbers are even so much more staggering, and we are so divided over it. It's just a staggering story.
And it's even hard to imagine that we would be as united a country should we have been attacked again now, like we were on 9/11, that we would be able to instantly unite given where we are and how divided we are.
But we don't even need to imagine. Hold on one second. But we don't even need to imagine if we were attacked, because we have been, we are going through this as a country, and we are so divided. So it's just stunning. Sorry, I cut somebody off. I apologize.
No, Jeff, it was just me, Cynthia. I just wanted to say that I think that what really poignantly points that out, what you're talking about in terms of division, is the images of last night's rally of people not wearing masks and just very angry, and the images of this morning in New York where people are wearing masks and somber. And I just think that putting those two images side by side is a very visual, scary image of two Americas, of two completely different ways of looking at life. And I just think that that's a very, we have this moment to show something so very visual that I think we should look at that.
Yeah. So the only thing I want to be careful of today is in any way disrespecting the 9/11 event. And I'm not suggesting anybody's would ever try to do that, but we do convey power in our messages. So let's just make sure that we don't in any way, and I'm not trying to suggest you're wrong, Cynthia, but I just don't want to disrespect in any way the 9/11 moments today. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, one thing from, it's more micro than this macro, but the non-mask wearing in the interviews that we had with the people, we're 6 months into this, and maybe these aren't our viewers, but these people still think that mask wearing is to protect themselves rather than to protect others. And I don't know whether Sanjay wants to do a segment and remind people about this again, but they're either ignorant or selfish to think that the mask wearing, they keep on saying, well, if I die, I die. It's not about you dying, it's about the other person dying. And sure, it does protect you somewhat, but I think that there's still among these non-mask wearers this idea that it's about protecting you rather than the more important about protecting me.
Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, Ben here. I think the booze last night in the NFL game was very impactful for the players that are trying to make a social statement. And the few people that are there with the restrictions that are there, you can still be overhear the boos. That must be something that I think a player, if we bring them on air, should be able to speak to. Considering the situation that they're playing under and the political atmosphere that the U.S. is living under right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it'll also be very interesting to watch how well, there's only one other game this weekend that has fans at it, and that's in Jacksonville. So, other thoughts?
I think on the political side of things, there might be something to an analysis of profiles in leadership between President Bush and President Trump. That's two Republican leaders who led the country through two national crises. And just how their approaches were different, how their administrations handled things differently. I think that might be something that strikes our audiences in a bit of a different way.
I think that's a really, really good idea. I think that's a really good idea today. And I'll remind everybody that Garrett Graff wrote the oral history of 9/11 in his book, so he'd be a good voice throughout the day. But I think the comparison of the handlings of it is a really good idea. Any other thoughts? Okay, digital.
Hey, we had 31 million yesterday. The lead story, not surprisingly, was the Collinson, Woodward, and Trump leads we had most of the day. That was our most interactive story. After that was the White House reaction to the Woodward. Then our 18 interviews, behind the 18 interviews with audio. And then CNN investigates the Amazon exploding branded equipment and goods. Then the death and obits of Diane Riggs, who died. Overnight, our strongest piece, and it's doing incredibly well still right now, was Joe Lockhart's opinion piece on Kayleigh McEnany and how she crossed the line that every press secretary has to deal with at some point. Do you back the truth? Do you back your boss? And obviously we know which way she went. But right now that has close to 20,000 concurrents on it. It's doing incredibly well. Other things came super well under it, but it's got half as many audiences. Collinson on the Trump denialism and twisting, as we said earlier, the history of Churchill and FDR. Number one video on mobile has been Jonathan McCarl asking the president, why did you lie to the American people? And on desktop, it's been the Trump supporter, again, as we talked about earlier, saying it's a fake pandemic. Today, of course, we're all over 9/11. We have the 9/11 DLE up now, and we're live streaming from events in New York and then later on Shanksville. Excuse me. Coronavirus, the Fauci stories about hunkering down for a worse winter to come. We're on and we'll stay on all day. Third important story is, of course, the wildfire story. We have kind of three, I think, really standout pieces on it. QAnon is implicated now even in this story. They're calling in false reports of fires and blaming them on Antifa activists, which is really frustrating, obviously, to overstretched fire departments. We have a piece on how it looks and sounds to people living through this right now, bringing it to all of our audiences. And then most, I think, dramatically, these devastating fires are just the beginning of our climate-changed world. Worse disasters are coming. And then finally, I'll point out we have some really distinctive photo projects underway. Our 9/11 photographer is actually shooting New York City today, how the city is memorializing this anniversary. And we also have a piece coming probably more this weekend, since we have lots of 9/11 today, on the Lesbos refugees, and looking at those people now, in even more dire situations spread across Europe. And that'll be this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, John.
Good morning, Jeff. On coronavirus, Fauci gave his dire warning about the fall. Yesterday, we see Fauci twice today, 11 a.m. and noon. So we'll see if he builds on that. Elizabeth Cohen in the top spot of many of the shows, grabbing these Fauci headlines, the CDC new forecast. It's an interesting study about people who went to restaurants and then getting sick. Sanjay Gupta is interviewing the head of Operation Warp Speed at noon. We're ready to get him up right after there, starting at 1 o'clock, around the news that's made there. And let that be a driving headline. Keeping the education headlines prominently in a prominent space. Evan McMorris-Santoro on Des Moines schools defying the governor of Iowa and the White House task force on college clusters, and saying, please don't send your students home. And then John Harwood from the White House still staying with those pictures and that sound from the rally last night in Michigan. The NIH chief comments about that, and Trump this morning tweeting it's better to work in an office than work from home, despite what public health experts are saying. We have the next hour, the chancellor of the University of Illinois. Really good story there. They put all these testing safeguards in place, yet the students have kept partying, and they're seeing huge clusters there. We'll have that conversation with him. And we also have the Houston mayor coming up with John King. They are beginning to significantly ease restrictions in that city, which was so hard hit as the numbers begin to go down. On 9/11, very altered ceremonies due to the pandemic. We're marking all the key moments. We're on the Pentagon one right now. Athena Jones at Ground Zero when we start the Pentagon, and then obviously the action in Shanksville with Trump there later this hour. We'll take his comments, and then Biden during the 2 p.m. hour. We do have Garrett Graff booked this afternoon to get into the stark difference in this country post 9/11 and how it's handling the pandemic. He just wrote in The Atlantic that the country has lost its collective resolve during this crisis compared to what we saw 19 years ago. Doing a lot of step backs today because it has been an extraordinary week. We're doing fact checking with Daniel Dell, everything that Trump had to say about Antifa and the auto industry, which was just wrong. Clapper on Trump's comparing himself to FDR and Churchill, and then Trump's very bad week. Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, and Tulu Olorunipa on that. We're flanking the wildfires from California to Oregon with Sarah Seidner and Camila Bernal. Today with Brooke, we do have Toby Waite in a Stanley book. Really compelling story, forced to flee the Creek Fire with just hours after noticing the first plumes of smoke. We'll hear the dramatic tale. And Poppy coming up has Daniel Swain, who's become something of a Twitter sensation. He's a UCLA climate scientist. Been very active just about the rising temperatures out west and how that's just fueling this unprecedented fire season. We're watching the George Floyd officers in court. The hearing just began. Josh Campbell's there. We'll get him up depending on what news is made. And then we have the 3 p.m. Medal of Honor ceremony for Sergeant Major Thomas Paine. It's an extraordinary story of heroism. We will take that event during the 3 o'clock show.
Okay. Thank you very much, John Washington.
Morning. At 4 o'clock, Jake picks up with, we got Jeremy Diamond doing our White House donut, and we'll have analysis of this week. Also 9/11 events and how much has changed. Nick Watt has our coronavirus wrap, and Sanjay as well, of course, interested in this Operation Warp Speed interview. Mike Rogers and Julia Cayenne will join on national security issues from the Woodward book and more. West Coast Fires with Sarah in California, Lucy in Oregon. Psychologist Andrea Bonnier joins us on homeschooling, and Jeff Zeleny has that piece on North Carolina voting underway.
And in the Situation Room, we will be following these new warnings from Fauci about the fall and hunkering down. All of this in the context of the 19th anniversary of 9/11. Those comparisons of now versus then we will weave throughout our 2 hours. We will follow on the CDC projecting another 25,000 deaths in the next 3 weeks. We'll follow on all the Collins top lines out of the town hall last night, the shock of lack of mask wearing, and then the comment then flagged about herd immunity. We'll get to Sanjay and his Operation Warp Speed interview. We'll look at these newer hotspots that are developing that Fauci has flagged in the Midwest. We'll see what he says at this 11 o'clock event. We'll get to all of that, the vaccine news as well with our doctors, and we have the Hill and Watt rap pieces. We'll also promote to Erica's Sesame Street special tomorrow. We will also internationally get to the news spikes in Europe and in the Middle East. Are we on the verge of another lockdown there? Out of the White House, we'll follow
Trump through the day and all of these 9/11 ceremonies, all of the of last night's rally, Acosta's interviews with some of these supporters who say they don't care about wearing masks, and Trump comparing himself to Churchill and FDR. We'll follow on the failed stimulus and the failure of Washington. We have Nancy Pelosi books, so we'll press her hard on that. We'll follow on the new mail-in ballot threads, and we'll keep an eye on fires. And that's where we're starting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before we move to the weekends, does anybody else have anything they want to bring up?
Hey, Jeff, just from the alternative programming world, Marcus mentioned the Amazon investigation. I just want to tell everybody that, like, the response to that for the investigative team has been amazing, and we've received tons of information from consumers about stuff that appears to be even much worse than the incidents we reported on, so we'll have follow-up on that. The Times tech people pulled a recommendation for an Amazon microwave citing our reporting, and the buzz in the tech industry, blogs and news services and stuff is off the charts. It's a big deal.
Great. And it was our biggest social share yesterday, too. It was our biggest thing on social yesterday.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, then let's move to the weekends, please, and start with the weekend. And let's start with Smirkanish.
Good morning, Jeff. So is the media going easy on Joe Biden? Now, Biden needed to do the Jake Tapper interview. There weren't any softball questions, and Biden handled it well. He looked good. But there's a stark difference between the questioning of Biden during these press events. Biden has been asked why he's not angrier, how he's going to spend his record monthly haul. We have Atlantic staff writer Edward Isaac Dover. He asked Biden about President Trump's soul and the life he leads. As a journalist, is this helping or hurting Joe Biden? Does it further the narrative that Trump is putting out there? So that's where we're starting. And can firefighters alone win the battle against these massive Western wildfires? And to be eligible for the Best Picture Oscar, should a movie be required to meet diversity standards? We have UCLA professor Gabriel Rossman. He'll say these rules will have little impact. And are we ready for some political football? The NFL has determined that many of the fans are tuning in for political theater, not just the touchdowns. Will that be true? Will the fans be there? We have Stephen A. Smith. And that's where we start.
Okay. Then, as noted, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., following Smirkanish, we're doing our next Sesame Street Town Hall Back to School, hosted by Eric Hill and Sanjay. Lauren, are you on the line?
I'm here. We are taking a look. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Okay, great. So we are taking a look at a school year like no other, and just like kids across the country, the Sesame characters find themselves in a bunch of different scenarios. Elmo is going to preschool with a mask on. Rosita is staying home and learning virtually. Big Bird is doing a hybrid. So they reflect that, and then we have a ton of great questions from teachers, parents, and kids. We have Sanjay and Dr. Edith Bracco-Sanchez to handle all the science and personal safety questions. Sal Khan will tackle some of the issues and questions around virtual learning. We have a kindergarten teacher from Jacksonville, Florida, who will handle the in-person questions. And then we have a Sesame workshop expert and a child psychologist on the social emotional impact this is having on all kids. A lot of good moments from the characters, and the show will also include messages from Melania Trump and Dr. Joe Biden.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Let's move to Sunday, please, and start with Inside Politics.
Dana Bash is hosting this weekend. We'll break down the impacts of Trump downplaying danger and the packed, mostly maskless rallies with Dr. John, Dr. Rani, and Maggie Haberman and Amy Walter on Trump's claims he didn't lie but was trying to stop a panic, as Biden says it's almost criminal, and how that's playing with voters. From Battleground, Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan on the bombshell Woodward book, the stimulus failure, and as a veteran, what the president's words about the military mean to her. And as the White House report is focusing on college towns and testing sewage, we'll interview the head of the University of Arizona on their precautions, including testing wastewater and their rising positivity rate.
And that's where we start.
Okay, thank you very much. State of the Union.
Hey there. We're still working on our main guests and waiting for some answers this morning. We're obviously going to be focusing on the Woodward response, COVID. We'll be keeping an eye on the wildfires. We do have Congresswoman Val Demings, so we'll talk to her about the president's law and order message, problematic Florida polling for Biden. She's on Intel, so we'll ask about election interference and the complete inaction of Congress to pass any aid. And we should hopefully have some answers on our top guest shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. GPS.
Good morning, Jeff. Thanks. Freed has a very strong take on how we should be prepared for election day to turn into election month or perhaps much more. And he offers some grim potential scenarios that we ought to be watching out for in the post-election mess. We'll do a panel on the state of COVID around the world and whatever the big world affairs stories, other world affairs stories happen to be on Sunday morning. That's Ian Bremmer, Zanny Minton-Beddoes, and Anne-Marie Slaughter. Then any list of the countries that have tackled COVID best probably leads with Taiwan with 25 million people. They've had only 7 deaths. Freed will talk to the person responsible for that success. He's both an epidemiologist and the vice president of the country. And Freed will also talk to billionaire businessman and Carlyle Group founder David Rubenstein about leadership, something that seems to be sorely missing in much of the world today.
Okay, thank you. Reliable sources.
All right, we have a lot to play off the Woodward book. We know how Trump spends his day, so we'll also look at how this is all viewed with the Fox News goggles. We'll get into the Woodward debate that we spent a lot of time yesterday's meeting talking about. We have Sam Donaldson, we have Bill Carter, we're working on some others. Netflix CEO Reed Hastings sat down with us. We'll have that, and then we're also going to have Clarissa Ward on her new book.
Great. Okay. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up?
I had the great fortune of reading Clarissa's book, and I would recommend everyone to read it. You'll love it.
And I also want to make, sorry. Yeah, I also want to make a recommendation about some important weekend reading, actually important everyday reading by our own Esmitra Kalita called Before You Can Fix Your Newsroom, You Need to Fix Your Life. She says there are no easy answers to solve for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It must become a way of life in order to become a way of work. And she gives some suggestions, and it's on the Neiman Foundation website. So it's a must read.
Some great recommendations for the weekend.
That said, one more, and I think Janita would agree. I think everybody who works here and every American should read the book Cast, because it's an astounding and eye-opening look at how, whether or not how divided this country always has been on racial lines, and it's just a fascinating new way to look at it.
Okay. Any other thoughts or recommendations? Okay, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great day and a great weekend. Stay safe. Bye-bye.